So would you use that when you see the neurotransmitters on organic acid as both serotonin and dopamine low?
I use it when, I mean, it's a homeopathic preparation, so it's totally different than like the GABA flow or DOPA flow, which are direct nutritional amino acid and vitamin interventions. With the neurotransactive, it's homeopathy, so it should have a balancing effect on that full spectrum of neurotransmitters. So when I use it with kids with behavioral issues or slow speech development. I use it most often with bedwetters. I see a lot of success there, but there's GABA support in it, there's dopamine support, there's serotonin support, and I believe there's acetylcholine and norepinephrine. So I use it mostly in kids, or when people are really sensitive, when they might need things like methyl B12 or folate support BH4, but they're not in a place where they can take methyl B12 or folate, then I might reach for that preparation instead. Very similar to that, PHP has a neuro T liquescence.
I'm just trying not to use them.
Yeah. And I do, honestly, I really like a lot of their homeopathics, but I think the neurotransactive from Apex is really fantastic. And that's one that I've reached for years.
And would you do like one spray per day just to see how they do, or do you really need it throughout the day?
I tend to find a little goes a very long way there. So again, I'm primarily using it with kids. I do one or maybe two sprays to start. I might go up as high as one spray 3 times a day, but a little is going to go a long way. With bedwetting, sometimes I'll have them do 2 sprays at night before bed.
I wonder then if that would actually help for an adult that keeps getting up to urinate in the middle of the night.
I don't know, because it's typically a different type of presentation. Because with bedwetters, where this product tends to help is with the kids who are getting into such a deep sleep that they're not waking up. They're waking up hours after the fact, like cold and wet. And with that group, it tends to balance things out within about a week. Like, it's shockingly fast. And I stumbled upon this inadvertently, and it has worked in like 97 out of 100 kids. If there's a lot of parasite issues, it may not be enough to fully resolve bedwetting, but if it's like a dopamine and GABA imbalance with the sleep and wake cycles, it can be a great tool.
So how do you know when to try to pull it out?
Like stop using it?
Honestly, with this one, once if we're using it for bedwetting, for instance, once it has fully resolved for several weeks, then I suggest tapering it. And there are a lot of people who find that when they stop it, the bedwetting comes back. So it tends to be kind of an ongoing intervention, but it's also the type of thing that if it's working for bedwetting and you stop taking it and the bedwetting comes back, it usually goes away again pretty promptly with the reintroduction. So it's not like you end up back at square one.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't think it's a forever for the rest of your life type of thing. But again, it's a homeopathic remedy. It's a totally different way of looking at things. So I think we should probably at the same time be asking what created that neurotransmitter imbalance, and we can use the homeopathic to kind of course correct, but then we want to set them on the right path long term as well.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to move us along because we have a lot in the queue and hopefully we can get to most of it. So Terry, you also had some test results that you were gonna
Yeah,
Can you pull those up?
all of a sudden they just started coming in. Let's see.
So do your most
Mary, while
important.
you're looking at that, why did you say that you were not wanting to use the PHP neuroteliquiescence?
There's no rice starch in there.
Is it the rice?
Is it?
I thought it was liquid.
A lot of the
Oh, I'm saying there's no rice starch.
a lot of the homeopathics have the alcohol base, but I've been just trying to pull away from using PHP altogether. I just had a confrontation with Heather about all the rice.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I just,
I'll say it out loud. They're evil.
that's helpful. Thank you.
I did see some things.
Unofficially, right?
Yeah, I saw some
You
things
didn't hear
that-
it here.
Can you
Okay.
guys hear me? I just want to know, my
Yeah.
screen is freezing. You hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't see on this end, you're not freezing, so we can see
Okay.
you fine and hear you fine.
My connection, thanks.
So do we think that they're just evil, but like there are some good products that
Mhm.
that's a dilemma, I guess, but
Yep.
Well, my understanding is Bob formulated them all.
okay.
Let's
well.
not go down that rabbit hole. Let's not go down that
All right.
rabbit hole.
All right.
Or
Sorry.
not exactly. Let's say sort of. He was involved in the formulation.
One
I'm
thing,
not trying to ask bad questions, by the way. I just don't
know.
know.
Yeah,
I don't know
it's-
any of this.
Yeah, and I know about like 30% of it, so it
Sorry.
just could
I
be
didn't.
and I'm not trying to shut down the question. I'm just this could be a very long discussion, and we
Cool.
don't have time to go down into the PHP rabbit hole at the moment.
No, it's all good. I just am thinking
Okay.
solely from a formula perspective, and I trust you guys.
Yep.
And so that's the only reason why I asked, because I want to be able to treat my patients
Yeah,
well.
I mean, the way I feel about it is if I have a patient who needs one of their formulas, I'm going to use it. But if I
Okay.
can transition away, I'm going to do that as well. That's my
Okay.
personal stance.
okay.
So,
That helps.
I can tell you that internally at Tree of Life, we still have PHP classic products on the shelves. We still have some of the methyl-genetic nutrition line on the shelves because there are still a lot of good formulas in that line. But there is definitely that shift away from them as a whole. But as a practitioner, I still recommend a handful of those products because I think that for certain people's needs, that's still the place I'm going to go. And I mean, like, I think pretty highly of the oxalate scavenger and balancer because I put them together. And, you know, do I think that they stole those formulas from me? Yes, but I still think that some people need those formulas and they work.
Well, I'd like to know if in the pyramid and also in the online training that the new one that they launched, if they're still, that's two different categories, but are the products being referenced? Because Terry mentioned something about Pond One recently.
Anything that there is definitely a clear replacement for in the FGN line has been pulled completely from the pyramid already. Like PHP is out of the pyramid with exceptions like the S-acetylglutathione, I think is still there because there's no analogous product in the FGN line. But when the SOD Plus came out, the ProSOD catalase came out of the pyramid. And part of the course redo is to get rid of the PHP product recommendation.
So are there other recommendations that are suggested?
Yes.
If not
And
FGN, do they talk about astaxanthin, for example, and pomegranate seed?
so he is shifting the recommendations to kind of you can choose to view it in two different ways, the complete FGN product or just the individual nutrients needed to support the pathway. So I don't know when the programmers will be done with that transition, but that is one of their active projects.
That's
So
helpful.
you're saying programmers, you're now referring to the pyramid? Is that what?
To everything within the software. So the pyramid, the supplement report, the pathway maps,
Yeah.
all of that.
That's what I'm sorry. That's what I meant, the FGA stuff.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
All right, Terry,
Okay.
back to you.
So I have 3 of these tests that came back and I'm starting to see a pattern. So this one, she has mycotoxins, but we pretty much got rid of them. But she does have a little bit of gut issues that were still, just digestion because of the mycotoxins we're trying to finish restore. So when I look at this level, let's see what she's on. We stopped she was on B6, but we stopped that for several days before she took this test. And she was on fish oil. We stopped that for a little bit too before the test. So I'm looking at it and saying, okay, if she was taking B6 here and the serine is up, and then this one's up, I mean, it sounds like to me she might need that B6.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And digestively, she might do well with something like the jarrow bile acid factors.
Now, why would you say that? Why would you come up with that?
The low taurine.
So anytime
and
you
the
see
low
low
and
taurine,
well, the combo of low taurine and low choline makes me think that, especially if she's having mycotoxin issues.
okay. Well, mycotoxin, her last mycotoxin and organic acid look really good.
Awesome.
So we've gotten rid of a bunch of things. I just feel like we're on that side that, okay, we have to restore. We got to kind of pick up the dirty pieces that the mycotoxin kind of left.
Mm-hmm.
Would you give PC in this situation?
You could, that would be one way to go. That would help with facilitating that excretion of mycotoxins by making more bile rather than taking it.
So since this one is fine and this one is low, do you think that that would be all? I was looking at her organic acid and I was thinking she might need some fatty acid assist. So let's see. This was her first mycotoxin. This is it now.
Oh, wow.
It's all clear. And then this was her organic acid that was first. And so this was her fats first. And then we just recently did one. And this was her. So, I was looking at this, the riboflavin is actually high. I was even wondering, should I just recommend riboflavin since these are fine?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and look at how low her B6 is there too. So, and her B5 is also pretty low. Was she doing a carb restricted diet?
It's semi-restricted. She is one that she kind of puts herself, I've tried to get her to eat more variety, but she puts herself on this restrictive, like 5 foods. Wow. And I can't seem to get her off of that.
Huh, how are her neurotransmitters?
Is what I was gonna look at really quick.
Do you guys agree with their standards? Like when they note that they're below the mean, is that kind of like your gauge along with their symptoms? Or do you have different parameters on here?
I think their means are generally pretty good, but like with the B6, even when it's on the low end of the mean, then it's still probably way too low. Right. With B5, we definitely have to think about what's being done supplementally because of how water soluble it is. So that one can be a direct correlation when it's elevated with supplementation.
What about neurotransmitters? You know how they always will comment like if they're below the mean. Do you take that seriously or more so that symptoms?
With the neurotransmitters, I always think we have to correlate it with symptoms.
But if below the mean and symptomatic, like Terry, can you bring it back up really quick, please? Like the neurotransmitter section. I'm just curious, like.
So if this was like a low motivation, risk-taking behaviors, addictive tendencies, then yeah, I think we should definitely do something about that dopamine.
Right.
But like B6 is a building block for dopamine, and we know that's low. We know there's adequate SAMe. So, we could look at what's happening with COMT. This may be a lack of mutations on COMT. This is where sometimes they can be protective. But mycotoxins can suppress dopamine production pretty significantly. So we know we have that environmental toxin previously, which could result in this type of presentation. So if we then also have symptoms that correlate with it, we would want to think about how we could help support that in a meaningful way. And if there's also histamine symptoms here, then something like quercetin may be a great intervention because that would also inhibit COMT activity and allow those dopamine levels to rebound a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see for her, what is that COMT looking like?
So, nothing to really write home about, nothing that's going to slow that breakdown. Mm-hmm. And this is where she is methylating properly on that test. So if there is impaired production because of the mycotoxins and there's nothing helping her hold on to it, those levels are really going to drop. So that tells us that we shouldn't always look at these polymorphisms as a bad thing. If we came to genetics 8 years ago, 10 years ago with Ben Lynch, and we heard all about COMT and how this is such a big deal, and these people are going to have sky high dopamine. Not always. A lot of times we'll find things balancing one another out. So it's important not just to look at that any one SNP in isolation. We always want to cross-reference with the functional labs and the presentation and think about the totality of what's going on between the environmental exposures and the pathways.
Do you think since choline is low here and riboflavin is low on her oat, even though there's not markers on the oat indicating the need for choline, that it might still be a good idea to do fatty acid assist?
Yeah, I think so. And there's not a huge amount of choline in the fatty acid assist.
Okay.
So then you would do fatty acid assist? Is that what you guys just said?
Yeah, I think you could do that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because she also needs the B2 and the B5.
Right.
And then the methionine is low.
Yeah.
So what I've noticed.
Does she eat animal protein?
Yes, I probably not a whole lot though. Now
Okay.
over here for her GIF, it's actually homozygous, and that's the pattern I'm starting to see with these three people. Two of them has homozygous GIF.
How is her B12, her methylmalonic acid on her oat?
Let's see.
So that was in range.
Mm-hmm.
And can you go down to the amino acid metabolites as well, please?
Bottom.
That's them, right?
Bottom. Keep going one, like a couple more.
Keep going.
Next page, next page.
Oh, not the mitochondrial amino acid metabolites, the last section after the nutrition.
Oh,
This one,
Okay.
sorry. Okay, so those look good. So there's a significant amount of methionine in animal protein. So if we're eating meat, there's also a significant amount of B12 in animal protein. As long as we are digesting and metabolizing it. So if there's low methionine, she may not be eating enough protein.
Yeah, what are her 5 foods?
Let's see. Well, you know what? She doesn't list them on the journal. I'd have to look in my notes.
Okay, never mind.
But I mean the simplest thing there is for her to eat some meat or get a protein powder, something with a bioavailable protein. With the GIF, even if we're eating meat, we're not necessarily going to absorb gastrointestinally adequate B12. And if we're taking a multivitamin that we swallow with B12 in it, we're not getting that B12. If we take like a methylation support product that we swallow and it doesn't contain intrinsic factor, we're not going to absorb all that B12. So we can circumvent that with a sublingual preparation or something with intrinsic factor. But the methylmalonic acid is a pretty reliable marker for intracellular B12.
Well, she's not on the zinc. Maybe zinc would be a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Or if her 5 foods do include some meat, she just might need more digestive support to break it down and assimilate those amino acids. Or she might just need to spend more time chewing. You know, sometimes we forget that first step, that especially with animal protein, it's really important that we're chewing it properly.
She does take
Make soup.
betaine.
Okay.
And so the MMA, is my understanding correctly though, that's more related with adenosylcobalamin? Is that true, Emily, or no?
It may be. That fact does not live in my brain at this moment. I'm
It's
sorry.
okay. I feel like I heard somebody at Dutch point that out recently because of their MMA. And so I feel like they were saying it's specifically correlated. I used to think it was methylation, like or related to methyl B12, but I feel like I've heard a couple times recently it's more specific to adenosylcobalamin. So I was just curious. Whatevs.
And the glutathione is low. Would we consider glycine?
But it's not really glycine that's missing there.
Cysteine.
Right. So
B6 should help to,
help here, increase
Yeah.
this, and then go that way.
yeah. And B6 should also help that serine make more cystathionine.
Down too, yeah.
Okay.
When we're talking bioavailable protein powder, what are some of y'all's faves?
It depends on what their sensitivities are. So a lot of protein powders are really high in glutamate just because it's that free glutamic acid. So there's a big group of people that I just don't recommend protein powders for, even if nutritionally I think they need it. I think that biochemically it can go awry. So if there's histamine sensitivity, the list is also fairly limited. Hemp, watermelon seed, and whey, if it's tolerated, are your lowest histamine protein powder options. There's a company called Simple that makes a single ingredient watermelon seed. That one tends to be pretty well tolerated. Wherever possible, I like to use single ingredient protein powders, not like this is your daily meal with everything in. The more you start layering in flavoring agents and gums, things like that, the more problematic it's going to be. So if histamine is not an issue, then things like grass-fed collagen powders are often a good choice. Super important that it's grass-fed and finished.
Do you guys see more people tolerate whey than some people may give credit for?
Yeah.
Like, I think it gets categorized as this evil thing sometimes because it's dairy,
Awful.
but I think that it's not necessarily always bad, you know?
Yeah. No, and especially for people with histamine issues and gut and blood sugar issues, it's one that I often recommend for people at night before bed if they're waking up between like 2 and 4 a.m.
Totally.
Now, orthomolecular does have a few brown rice protein powders if people are not reacting to rice. Now, they are definitely more nutraceutical with a lot of things added to them. But I
Yeah.
do sometimes use their glycemic foundation for people with insulin resistance. And sometimes I'll use the Apex Clearvite. They make a few different ones. I tend to reach for the Clearvite CR. There's some liver support in it. There's some probiotics. That one is more of like your multi at the same time. But I use all of those much less than I use single ingredient protein powders, the whey, the hemp, the watermelon seed, collagen.
Super helpful. Anything besides histamine that would make you say, let's not do collagen?
It is higher in glutamate also.
Right?
Like, even if I think somebody could handle a little bit of glutamate, collagen is probably going to be way too high.
Too
Way
much.
too high. And green pea is also really high in glutamate because green peas are a really high glutamate food, and bone broth is a really high glutamate food. So when you distill that down and look at the amino acid breakdown, the glutamic acid is significantly higher in those.
So helpful.
So this person is the one I've talked about previously that had some blood clots.
Okay.
And with her D-dimer, it was like in the 4, we got it down to 2 something. And so I'm looking at this, and this homocysteine was, I think, a 14. Yeah, a 14. She has hetero MTR. She is also homozygous for GIF and then hetero for TCN2. And she's hetero for this one, the BHMT, hetero for this one, hetero for this one. She's okay at the MAT, at the MAT. She's okay here.
Yeah, that MTR is definitely giving her some issues with getting that homocysteine back into methionine. And then what's happening in the transsulfuration pathway?
So you see that one, that cysteine looks high. So what is it up here? Yeah, it's high within range at 379.
Mm-hmm.
So with her,
so we should look at her Y-glu-cis and GSS to see why she would have enough glycine and cysteine and not be turning it into glutathione. Okay, so the GCLC is fairly significantly variated. So that's the enzyme that would put glutamate and cysteine together.
so how would you support that?
go into the pathway map and let's see if we can find any cofactors for that enzyme. This is one place where we might have to have her take it if we can't figure out how to get her to make it. So an ATP is a cofactor there.
Where are you looking?
So move the map just a little bit. There you go. So the
Oh, another thing, I just did a glyphosate test on her because glyphosate, let's see if I can find it.
That's a good thought.
That was her D diamond. This is her glyphosate
Glyphosate
test.
component, or what made you say that? Okay.
Well, that, and I don't know how it would show up on the test. I don't know if the glycine is replaced by the glyphosate, if it would show up as on the test as a. Do you
As a
know, Emily,
good
whether
level.
it still shows up as glutathione on the test, or? But it's,
I don't think that glycine would show up in normal range on the test. So,
but I
Stephanie-
mean, the glycine inside the glutathione, would that prevent the glutathione from being recognized on the test or not as glutathione? Like, would your levels, like if you had a ton of.
So the glutathione would not be formed if there was glyphosate that had inserted itself in the place of the glycine. So that would, what you would get would not be glutathione. So the glutathione level would be low because it would not be
Right.
there. It's not like it's a glutathione with a little extra glyphosate attachment. It would not add up to glutathione, but you would also see low glycine on
Above
that
it. Okay.
methylate plasma
Okay.
panel. So
Yep.
What is y'all's functional cutoff for the glyphosate? I'm glad you showed that, Terry.
So this is a tough test to read, and it's not one I often order in isolation, because you definitely have to read it in the context of how they are eating. And if they're eating a standard American diet and excreting a pretty significant amount of glyphosate, that's a 1-to-1. And you can use it to show them that they should stop doing that. If they're eating a standard American diet and they're not excreting glyphosate and they have PON1 variants, that's probably a pretty bad thing. So context matters. And so we have better tools to cross-reference than the average person, because you can look at what's going on with the PON1, but we definitely have to think about the context of diet. So if you have someone who's eating strictly organically and they're showing a 1.4, that's too high. There's still glyphosate coming in somewhere, either from drift or their water or something that they haven't identified. There's not really a safe level of glyphosate, but for reference range, the European Union's allowable level is 0.1 parts per billion in drinking water. So they have more the precautionary principle. So that's 0.1, and that is below the lower limit of quantification on this test. So anything that shows up here is going to be too high. When we did the breast milk testing, that was one of the problems that we ran into within our own internal analysis. It was like, we have all these people who are not testing positive, but we can't, there's still this big window where they could still have elevated levels compared to the EU's allowable levels, but the test is not sensitive enough. So because this is an ELISA array, the sensitivity is much less than if it would be like mass spectrometry. But there's not a safe level. Anything that's showing up on this test is higher than it should be, but think about the context of what's being consumed.
She eats organically. So, you know, I was thinking since glycine is needed at the top of the heme pathway, and we're also talking about blood clots, then I wanted to run this to see if there was some kind of correlation there, and we might need to even bring in some glycine. She doesn't have PON1 defects.
Yeah. You know, show her this and check in with her on how organically she has been eating. You know, maybe
She's-
she pandemic shopped and stocked up on standard rice and beans and she's been eating her way through. Who knows?
She's also a nutritional therapist,
Okay.
so she's pretty good about her eating.
Then this should definitely throw up some flags for her. I mean, maybe it's her neighborhood and drift, maybe it's her water filtration being insufficient, maybe it's what her neighbors are doing, or maybe she has a kid who's spending a lot of time on soccer fields or playgrounds or things
Or a
like
pet, right? Like a dog or something that
Yeah,
she
like a-
sleeps with,
that. Mm-hmm.
like Joel will say.
But I mean, 2,4-D is going to be more widely used on those grassy type of areas than glyphosate because glyphosate kills everything.
Or
So,
they'd be working at Lowe's. Somebody might be working at Lowe's.
True. So, but a 1.4
Possible.
catches anybody's attention, right? Is that
Yeah, I
fair
mean,
to say?
it's not like glaringly high. It's around probably around the 50th.
Yeah.
If she was eating a standard American diet, it would not be an overwhelming amount of glyphosate. But for someone who's eating strictly organically, that's too high because glyphosate excretion per Monsanto, so take it with that really huge grain of salt, is fairly rapid. It's in and out. It's not bioconverted, which is why what we're testing for is not a metabolite, it's glyphosate. So it messes with the gut microbiome. It has a lot of additional problems. There may be some percentage of it that is retained, but the lion's share of it does come out. So why is this woman who's eating organically excreting this glyphosate? Where's it coming from? Like, that's definitely enough to say something's not right here. Either she's not actually getting organic foods and she thinks she is, or
Right.
eating it
Yeah.
elsewhere.
And so we would immediately look at glycine. So we see a 1.4, we could look at glycine, right? And see where things are. We know that hers looks good. And then from there, so obviously there's the counseling piece and the context that we need to look at. But then if somebody's like, oh my gosh, what do I do about this? What are y'all's typical courses of action?
So I think this woman looks like she needs that methylation support to divert some of her homocysteine into methionine, like sublingual B12. And I might think about giving her either a liposomal glutathione or S-acetylglutathione in the short term, but I would probably do the methylation support first. I might
In
think about
response to her glyphosate level? Sorry, I may have just asked that question poorly.
in response to her homocysteine level.
What about just in response? Like if a patient saw that and they're like, oh my gosh, is this bad? Or, like, obviously we explained the context of what you just said, but do you?
I would probably have her do like a month or so on PON1 Assist or the individual components, whatever would be right for her. Or I might break out the ADEX for a short round, depending on the individual.
Cool, that's super helpful. And then maybe recheck it and see where it is after those interventions.
Yeah. And so, upregulate the pathway to get out anything that's there while she's investigating where in her life this is coming from.
Hey,
So
Terry, we need to wrap up this person, so bring it to a close.
So because of the glycine levels looking okay here, we wouldn't do glycine, even though it tends to be blocked with the glyphosate.
The question is there glyphosate getting bound up with the cysteine, and like, is that why glutathione's not being made? It's more likely in this context that those variants in the Y-glu-cis are preventing that molecule from coming together. I think you would see low glycine if the glyphosate was the interfering factor.
Okay. All right. So the last person was this one.
We don't have time to go for the
That's
last one.
fine.
Okay, so if we could I'll try to circle back around to the third person. So
That's fine.
thanks, Stacy.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Barely.
Yeah.
Let me try to turn this up a little bit. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. This is just strictly genetic test. I want y'all to look at and just give me your opinion. Hold on. Let me figure out where it is on my screen. Okay, share my screen. There we go. Can you see his?
Yep, it's up.
Okay. All right. He has migraines, not terrible. They come intermittently, but when they do, they're pretty significant. And he's got some GI issues in the past that have been better. He's pretty healthy. He wants to stay healthy. And okay, his question is going to be, what can I do to optimize my health based on this genetic testing? So I just want to get your all's opinion. I'm good with explaining to him about the HLA and the AIAA. We haven't tested him for celiac, but I may do a wheat zoomer on him. I think he may need some proof other than this.
So he's still on gluten.
Yes.
Mhm.
He has a lot of methylation issues. What I could do is just scroll through this, and if you see anything blatant,
What is his age and his occupation?
he is 48. And what does he do? He owns a business management consultant.
So he's sitting at a computer most of the day?
Probably. He does a lot of traveling too. Why do you ask about the migraines?
Yeah, when does he get his migraines?
They're very sporadic, and usually I don't hear anything about them, so it isn't like something we'll talk about. I remember last time it seemed like it was triggered by light, like flickering light when he was in a meeting.
Oh, wow.
And he said, oh, and I drank this coffee that I don't usually drink, and maybe it was something to do with that. I don't know, it was like instant coffee or something at this meeting.
Did he get aura, Stacy?
Let me see if I made a note of that. Usually I do when I first meet them.
And like, do you think this is classic, like for real migraine, or this is like bad headache? I'm calling it?
No, he gets migraines, and he
Okay.
does get an aura.
Yeah.
He gets numbness in his hand, light and sound sensitivity, and nausea.
Yeah. Okay.
Could easily be gluten intolerant or celiac.
Yeah.
For dairy, is he taking any supplements currently? Like, could this be like a MAG or B6 issue for him?
He takes fish oil, Zymogen B active, 5-MTHF, K2D3 5000, CoQ10, and a probiotic.
So no MAG?
No.
I may have missed it. Okay.
No.
I know I'm asking very cliche questions. Sorry.
You start with the basics. You got to start with the basics.
Yeah, is he drinking enough water? I mean, sometimes there's.
And has he gone keto? I'll see like, I don't know if you guys see this, specific patients, like as they go into ketosis, they'll have migraines. Kind of interesting. Then they're fine, but going that transition, sometimes I'll see migraines. Sorry, back to the fun stuff, Stacy.
He has not done keto. We actually talked about it because he was trying to get his body fat percentage down. He exercises, but not intense. he eats pretty healthy, but like wasn't really doing anything specific, more like a paleo type diet. And I had talked to him about maybe trying keto and intermittent fasting and high intensity interval training, because he's like, I want to get my body fat down to whatever his goal was, 20%.
And what is
It's
his
not too
weight,
bad.
height? His weight and his height? Do you have that?
He is 228. He's 6'2". And I'll tell you his body fat. We just did it recently. He is 24% body fat.
Okay.
His highest was 26. I think he was saying he wants to get down closer to 20.
Mm-hmm.
And you said he's paleo-ish. Do you think he's been ever like 100% gluten and dairy free, or is he like, I'm kind of paleo because I want to do CrossFit or something?
No, and when I say more like paleo, I mean he eats mostly meat and vegetables, but he's not on any kind of elimination diet. I'm sure I have talked to him about that in the past. He's one that I see like once a year, and he's like, hey, I'm good, I feel good. And it isn't like we're really addressing anything specific.
Cool.
I don't even remember why we talked about the genetic testing, to be honest with you. Like it isn't like he was having a big problem and I said, oh, we need to get this to find something out. It was more like, I want to optimize my health. What kind of things can we look at? And so that's why we did it.
I would definitely look at that gluten piece.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I don't,
Yeah.
Yes, I will.
And the other thing is if he's kind of cycling around this 24% body fat and occasionally gets serious and loses a little bit, it could be some toxin being released.
Right.
Yeah. Is
So
he?
Totally.
a binder kind of thing might
Yeah.
not. I don't know, right? She's just grasping at straws here.
Yeah, and if you could get him, Stacy, to be the gluten and the dairy, I only bring it up because
Try it.
having my patients do that, I have found like a very, very distinct dairy trigger with some, and I know that may sound so obvious, but it's pretty profound when they'll reintroduce. And I'm talking about a patient that gets a migraine 3 days later, like clockwork. And then okay, we take it out and we do it again, clockwork 3 days later.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's the underlying factors, because that can also happen in people who don't have those genes. I've seen that. And they've been exposed to tick-borne diseases and mold. So has he been, is he leptin resistant? Is he in mold? Is that considered?
I don't think so.
That, or a headache and the sensitivity to light and the numbness in his extremities also seems correlated with mold exposure.
He's lived in multiple different homes over the years. I've been seeing him like before I ever did functional medicine. I've been seeing him for 10 years. So, you know how you've seen somebody and you know new things, but you don't circle back around and do like the same thing you would with somebody new? That's him, because he's always good. He's, I feel healthy, you know. So I've never really approached him like I would other patients.
He's also a guy, and sometimes a guy, I'm fine, I'm great.
Yeah.
You're a reporter.
That's so
I
great.
complain all the time. What are you talking about?
with migraine, and especially with that dairy connection, Meredith, sometimes I think tyramine more so than histamine.
Huh.
And so dairy can be a big trigger, especially things like aged cheeses. And so sometimes that's just not the first dairy that we bring in, but a few days later we get a little bit more inclusive. But leftovers also can be a trigger. And so it becomes one of the harder things for people to identify, because they'll eat a food one day and feel fine, and then 2 days later they'll have it as leftovers and they have these terrible symptoms, and they're like, well, I know it can't be my food because I was fine the last time I ate this, but it's actually because of how that tyramine has built up. And migraine is a really specific symptom with that intolerance. So things like the UGT1A4 would be a place to look at, because that's a broad amine clearance, both histamine and tyramine. And the HDC would be another place to look there.
Well, what do you know?
Let's look them up.
Look at those.
Emily, you are amazing. I want your brain.
I know, right?
You can rent it.
Last price.
We're
That'd be
putting it
great.
up for rent.
But
bad dread migraine.
Didn't you say with the HDC that you might not be doing as well with B6?
Yes, so their B6 facilitates that histidine to histamine conversion. So things like iodine can be a good choice with HDC. That would be something to look at. But that UGT1A4 is pretty darn significant. So, I mean,
So
I think
is
that's a pretty compelling
the first
pattern.
one? Is it this first one that's most significant?
No, I think it's the totality of it. Out of all of those SNPs, we do see that top one homozygous more often than the others. So I tend to think the others seem to be more impactful, but symptomatically, this is one that jumps out, that we see those high histamine or high tyramine symptoms very strongly correlated with this set of SNPs. Like this is one that jumped out at us, not because we were pulling all this data on it, but because I was seeing client after client after client who had these unresolved histamine symptoms despite using DAO and other like things like quercetin. And then we added this pathway into the software and I was like, oh my God, all of these people have this issue. And we brought in the support and one after the other, they started getting very quick resolution for
Wow.
this histamine stuff.
What
So-
support did you
Wow.
bring in?
The glucuronidation assist.
Cool.
I just wonder about cultures where people are eating these aged cheeses all the time and, you know, working in cellars and stuff like that with the aged cheeses. And well, I mean, it's just part of, I'm thinking about France.
Mhm.
And I wonder if they just are not expressing that, or they don't have those genetic variations.
Yeah, or they may be doing other things to compensate. Like when we look at, like, let's stick with France and the pairing of red wine with red meat, which would block that absorption of heme iron and
Yeah.
mitigate for that iron overload type of risk. So there may be other ways that it's compensated for. Some of it may be the amount that's consumed at one time, which is not typically what we as Americans consume at one time.
Yeah.
Here's some thoughts about this guy is, Stacy, you said he's lived in mold before. So if he needs glucuronidation assist for this particular gene, then there's a chance ochratoxin A is a problem and all these other mycotoxins that needs this pathway to detoxify. So he might say, I'm fine, and it might be a problem for him.
Actually,
Getting mobilized.
I don't know that he lived in mold. I think I said he's lived in multiple homes over the years I've known him.
Okay.
And so there wasn't ever any pattern with symptoms in a specific place that he's lived that I know of. He
Okay.
actually just moved out of state recently. So I don't
would still
know.
investigate it.
Right.
Well, and if he feels really bad when you offer him something like glucuronidation assist, that may be part of your answer too.
Because
Yeah.
it's like mobilizing it, Emily. Is that?
Yeah, if you open up a really blocked pathway and start mobilizing those toxins, if you're moving phase 2 faster than that phase 3 can keep up with, you're going to feel worse rather than better.
Totally.
So what did you say? You said iodine. What was that for?
For that HDC, actually Bob's new hist-to-ease support in the FGN line is a pretty nice choice when you would see those HDC variants. But there you would want to avoid products with B6 because that can increase the histamine.
Would it be wise to run an iodine test from that? It's a company that starts with an H.
I have not run that one. I'm not familiar with it.
Let's see. Hakala. So okay, you would have to stop screen sharing because it won't let me. It's called HAKALA Labs.
And what's it testing for?
Iodine. It's a urine test, and it's an iodine challenge test.
Does anybody else get annoyed with like the blanket conclusions that no one with Hashimoto's should have iodine because of the studies that were done? That's so annoying to me. I should just say that
Yes.
out loud. Lame.
Well, I'm about ready to run this on my husband and I for the first time and check it out.
Oh,
Um,
definitely let us know.
Yeah. So you can get add some bromine and chlorine or chloride to it to be tested also besides the iodine
That'd be cool.
Mhm.
That would be super cool.
at this test, this lab. So if you order like this single wholesale, it's $50. No, that's a spot test. And then what was explained to me is this is showing if you get an iodine in food, but if you get the iodine loading test, then that's a 24-hour. And within the kit comes a 50, the microgram or milligram of iodine.
Yeah, milligram.
The dose.
So I'll let you know what I find out with that, but this was a test company I had just recently seen.
Do you guys have any specific thoughts about iodine? You know, like there's the extremities out there on both ends. What do y'all's thoughts?
I definitely go
Go ahead.
ahead.
No, go.
No, go ahead.
Sorry.
I see people who need it and do well with it with like subclinical thyroid stuff. Like often if somebody does not have a lot of thyroid stuff showing up on their labs, they definitely don't have any autoimmune thyroid issues. But maybe if the Dutch has a big imbalance between free and metabolized cortisol, those are people that I find respond pretty well to things like selenium and iodine. Like I'll often use the PHP, the selenomethionine, just because then it's a one a day, it gives them both. And it just kind of nudges them in the right direction, especially if it's someone who is, you know, as a lot of our clients change their diets and shift away from standard American diets, they shift away from things like standard American iodized table salt. And not a lot of them are reaching for things like sea vegetables to put in place. And so if we're getting rid of packaged and processed foods and iodized table salt, unless we're consciously adding that dietary iodine in, we are just from a foundation nutritional perspective missing that really key piece. So, you know, I would always rather people get it in from food, and we
Sure.
can do that, but we have to actively, mindfully do that.
The other issue with food is a lot of the processed food or some of the processed food doesn't necessarily use iodized salt. So they may be getting a ton of salt and still be iodine deficient.
Mhm.
Right. But are you guys ever using those high, like even 12.5, like iodoral or?
Yep, I have successfully.
For like
particularly with women with either
Breast.
breast cysts or any type of genital cyst, ovary type things. Sorry, my brain's a little foggy.
We talked about that wand, the lymphatic drainage wand before.
Yep.
You can use that, especially for fibrocystic breasts, to drive like topical iodine right in to that fibrous issue. Tissue, it can be a game changer when you actually drive it into the cells with that. I used to work with this Amish woman who, when she first came in, she had what she referred to as rock boobs. This poor woman, I mean, the Amish community does not talk about feminine health at all. And so she did not know that your breasts are not supposed to be like knock on them hard, crazy. And within just a couple of weeks, we had them feeling like normal breasts again. I mean, I
Wow.
sent her for mammography and thermography because like the first time that I laid my hands on her, I was like, oh, this is a big
Bad.
problem.
Not normal.
And it was every possible fibrocystic type of change there that you could imagine. And so she did multiple follow-up studies. The changes that we saw with driving that iodine in at the cellular level were phenomenal.
Wow.
Just
What's
when
the
you're
right
dealing
cost?
with iodine, it is a good idea to ask the person if they have an allergy to iodine. My sister is highly allergic to iodine. She had a gallbladder problem. They told her, she and my niece told the doctor, she's allergic to iodine. And the doctor even said, you can't be allergic to iodine. Well, they took her in the back. They used iodine in the betadine form, and she had an anaphylactic reaction and almost died.
Oh,
And of course, my niece was beside herself when they came out and said what was happening. And she was cursing at them saying, I told you. So, I'm just saying, we don't have an answer as far as how can somebody be allergic to iodine when the body needs iodine, but it's still enough of a red flag to say, okay, if somebody says they're allergic to iodine, then you need to be cautious of it.
absolutely. And you also would want to start really slowly with it because it can be overstimulating for
Yeah,
the
of
thyroid
course.
as well.
I just wonder, are we finished with Stacy? Because
No.
there was so much more.
No.
Yeah, we just saw the first page or so.
Yeah, well, we wanted to look at the iodine test, so I stopped sharing. So I will go back again.
I think that's such a significant pattern for him between the HDC and the UGT1A4.
Well, those
And
are,
so,
excellent
yeah,
points. And
definitely.
I did look back at my notes from when he first came to me, and I asked him what triggered his migraine, and chocolate was one of them. Chocolate,
That's
bananas, and
Oh my gosh, that's our
Yeah.
this is the tyramine foods list.
chocolate, bananas, and nuts.
Okay.
So that's tyramine, Emily?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. The banana.
The
And how do
banana,
you-
the chocolate.
Is that with the HDC?
No, that's the
Or the
UGT1A4.
UGT?
And although the HDC, there is some of an aging component there as well.
So is there a low tyramine food list? I haven't heard of that before.
Yes, it's very similar to the low histamine food list.
I mean, do you think,
Stacy, do you do the MRT test from Oxford Biomedical Labs?
no, what is that?
Oh, it's a mediator release testing for food allergies.
You
It's
do
not
that?
one I run very. Once upon a time, I did that one, but they have a good tyramine foods list.
Mm.
Their assay does measure tyramine sensitivity as one of their markers. But it's primarily the aging of proteins. And with HDC, again, it's the aging of proteins and the conversion of histidine into histamine. And so this is the conversion into, this is the buildup of tyramine. And so the UGT1A4 is that pressor amine clearance from the liver.
Okay. Let's see.
That's so great. Great. Thank you.
I don't know what this dark is.
I don't
That's
really know much
significant.
about that
Dairy?
either.
Malaria.
Has something to do with parasites.
Yeah.
He has a Hoga, some SNPs.
Well, he sure does. And I mean, we could certainly find connections between high oxalates and migraines,
Yeah.
and chocolate's one of his triggers. But I think because they're infrequent and it's not like an ongoing chronic pain type of issue.
Or maybe if it's infrequent, maybe start investigating where he's getting them. Like, does he go to a particular location or in a particular room in his home more often on those days that it's ignited? Mycotoxins can,
Yeah.
mode can be in those areas.
He has like 2 migraines a year. And you know how hard it
Oh.
is to track that
Yeah.
often?
Yeah.
That's
Oh, yeah.
really
I thought it
tough.
was happening more often than
No,
that.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
infrequent, but when he has them, they're very bad. Like he's in bed for 2 days. So if I could help him prevent them, which I have a feeling it's like Emily's saying, it's more related to his food
Yeah.
because they're so infrequent.
Well,
did-
and it's probably a perfect storm type
Mhm.
thing where it's the totality of what he's eating.
Mhm.
Maybe he has a glass of red wine and some cheese to go with it and a handful of nuts and then some chocolate
Not
and
enough sleep.
yeah, and a little dehydration and
Yep.
some leftovers from a couple days ago for lunch and
Right.
then like maybe some slow cooked meat,
Mhm.
like
Salami.
barbecue, something like that.
Smoked
Yeah.
salami or something like that.
Sounds so good.
He has really significant methylation SNPs, so I want you all to look at that and tell me what you think. Do you think this PANK4 is significant?
Maybe.
Oh,
It's-
what about pink with acetylation with histamine?
Well, and with the usage of fats, so if for energy, so if he's not breaking down and using his fats fully, is he accumulating more body fat than he would like because of that?
Has Bob talked about putting in here like which SNPs are more significant that we know? That's still frustrating because I see these homozygous and I'm like, and they don't have a question mark, so I don't really know if it's something that.
I know that kind of overall his goal is to add as much of that information as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So as it depends where he directs research efforts.
Right. Do you think with PANK, is it primarily you're thinking about energy and fatigue? Is that that's what I think of, but I don't know.
You're going to think about energy, think about hormones as well.
He does have low testosterone.
Okay, so the PENK could potentially be significant there because we need B5 to combine with dietary cholesterol to make, or to combine with dietary fats to make cholesterol, to make pregnenolone, and to make all of our hormones. So the low hormones, low energy, impaired detoxification, or alcohol tolerance, but more in a hungover type of way than a histamine type of way. So people who have a lot of active expressing issues with PANK can't acetylate properly. So when they consume alcohol, they get excessively hungover.
How do you support PANK? I mean, does B5 upregulate it?
You can push a lot more B5 as pantothenic acid, or you can use pantethine, which kind of circumvents the not working SNPs, much in the same way that giving 5-MTHF circumvents that not working MTHFR SNP. So it's kind of our workaround. You can give additional acetyl groups with things like an acetyl-L-cysteine or acetyl-L-carnitine. You know, we can think about that acetyl donor.
Okay.
And on the mycotoxin detox slides that Beth and I made for the conference, on each of those pathways, even though they're for the mycotoxin, some of the slides do show what to use to support each of those individual pathways. So they list a bunch of nutrients.
Right. Yeah, I love that. chart. That's very helpful.
Okay, Stacy, can you start wrapping?
Yeah, I want you to
Him
look
up.
at the methylation just really quick.
Excellent.
Because he's got all these folate SNPs. He's got some heterozygous on the DHFR. He's got MTR. He's got MTRR homozygous. It's like, what do I do with this? It's
Well,
like the
perhaps you
entire-
need
But-
to get that test that I've been
Yeah.
doing.
Because he's got a lot of MAT stuff also.
Uh-huh.
So I would echo what Terry's saying and run like the methylation plasma profile and see if it's giving him an issue. There's a few things in here where we may be getting that counterbalancing, where it may look bad if we think that every SNP is a
Mhm.
bad thing, but if again, some of these things may be holding other pieces in check. So run the test
Right.
and see where the levels are
This is
rather than
this-
just flying blindly, especially if he generally is feeling good.
Yeah, I've run like 5 of those methylation profiles, and my problem is I don't know what to do with the results. Like when things are off, then what do I do? Like, how do I support it? And then I feel like I'm going over it with the patient, and I'm like, what am I going to recommend?
Well, bring it here.
Yeah, and I will say with the AHCY, those are really unpredictable SNPs.
Uh-huh.
So Bob has for a long time said, when you see variants there, especially homozygous variants, that is the number one time to run the methylation plasma profile because all bets are off when it comes to guessing or making a clinical inference as to what's happening with methylation.
Okay, well, his homocysteine is between 8 and 11, depending on whether he takes his B vitamins.
Wow.
I've gotten it down to 7.6 with playing around with different P combos.
Okay.
His glutathione is high and optimal. So I don't really know if, like you said, if he feels overall pretty good, like, do I even need to do anything?
Mm-hmm.
I think the more we see the methylation profile, the more, just like with the organic acid, the more you see the test, the more, easily is known, okay, this is what we need to do. That's why I was bringing all 3 to say, okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Right.
Which I
But
thought you did good, Terry.
Yeah, and the GIF SNPs are really, really common. And it's not that they're not a big deal, but the metrics in Bob's software, 60% of people in the software have a homozygous GIF. Like it is really common.
So
we
it's
can't
it's
assume-
functional. That's right.
We can't assume that those people are going to do well with an oral B12 and how many times people are taking it.
right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, I'm good. Thank you all.
There's one last question, quick. How old was he again?
48.
Yeah, he's starting to. I think this is his window opportunity to correct some of the stuff before he heads into his mid 50s and
Right.
early 60s, where things start showing up like heart disease and worse things than that. So I would say yes, it's important. All right, Meredith.
Okay, guys, I feel like Emily because, well, I wish I was like Emily, but I have back to
I do
Emily's
too.
brain. No, I just have a patient who was Amish, who is now Mennonite, and who's really waffling with that decision. And I actually think that, like, I think both of their families, she's married and their families are Amish, and they're getting a ton of pressure. So this is actually like a great stressor for them. But that's a side note. I know you're used to this, Emily, but the not having a computer and technology part is very special too.
Yeah, it is. It is an extra wrinkle even when we are used to it.
Yes, I can only imagine dealing with that scenario often. But this patient came to me, she's seen a bunch of different functional medicine doctors and she's only read things. It's kind of nice, like she's only read books. And so it's not like she's exposed to a ton of information online all the time, which is cool. But she's been diagnosed and treated for Lyme, mold. She grew up in Tennessee, tons of tick bites. significant mold exposure, very sensitive to EMF, which is interesting because, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see any EMF SNPs on here, but
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
right,
Mold,
right,
tick-borne illness, both of those, heavy metals, those can
Totally.
create EMF sensitivity in the absence of any of the SNPs.
totally. But it is quite remarkable. Like she's very sensitive to fumes, and like it's very hard for them to heat their house because they live out here in Colorado in the mountains now, but it's very hard for them to heat their house because any type of I don't know like the right word for it, like a fuel, you know, like propane or
So what the Amish people around here do, which is horrible, because they don't, it's not that they don't believe in electricity, but they don't believe in being on the grid. And so some of them are doing things like solar, but the traditional way that they have run
It's a
things
generator.
like refrigerators and heaters,
Yeah.
diesel generators
Yeah.
inside their homes.
Oof.
So yes, and sometimes multiple ones because they're running refrigerators and chest freezers because they've got 72 children to feed, and they're
No judgment.
yay for those 72.
that come out as judgy, but like they're poisoning themselves with this a lot of the time. So
Interesting.
especially now, I mean, not every Amish sect is going to be the same, and my cat's joining the console.
I love it.
But ask about like how they heated their homes growing up, because that there might have been a lot of exhaust and benzenes and things like that for a long time.
Toxic burden.
Hey, aren't there other heavy metals within the diesel too? That, I mean, she could just be toxic through the right roof.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a very
Good call, Emily.
Wowzers. Yeah, she's very sensitive to those things. So she is delightful. I just saw her yesterday and I was like, you know what? Let me talk to my friends tomorrow and then we'll proceed. I've been caring for her since last December. So her main complaints right now, she's doing a lot better with things that we've done over that time. Her main complaints are fatigue. She's losing a lot of hair, and she's having inflammatory pain, like her shoulder and kind of back area will freeze, kind of, not like frozen shoulder. I was clarifying that with her, but she just feels super inflamed. I will side note that I don't have a Dutch on her. She may be losing hair because she's on a smidge of DHEA, and you know she could be 5-alphaing that. But anyways, I want to talk about her genetics and I want to show you her iron labs because let's see. I just want to show you guys going from one set of labs in September. And I've had her donate blood before I had her genetics, but these are her iron, and she says other people in her family deal with this. So her iron studies were crazy. This is after donating blood in May. And this was in the beginning of September. And then her ferritin, has been fine. I checked her copper and zinc then, and her copper was very, towards the bottom end of the range. And so
I think so.
Does she use cast iron pans?
Not that, I don't think so, because we've kind of explored this, we kind of exhausted this. So I want to say no. I just haven't talked to her about it recently. And then these are this next set of labs, no blood donation. And this is since the beginning of September to now. And her ferritin's very stable. And so I just wanted to show you guys her, and I put her on a little copper, by the way. That's the only thing that we did different since last time.
Morley Robbins would be happy.
You what?
Morley Robbins would be thrilled.
Oh, Morley. So here are her genes, and her heme pathway pops up as red. When I first saw her iron studies, I was like, oh, homegirl's gonna be hemochromatosis, but she's not. You know what I realized would be more helpful for you guys? Would probably be for me to go up here and do this.
Yes.
I guess my question for you is why would blood donation be suggested when ferritin was fine?
Because her iron study, I mean, her iron was so high.
Yeah,
I don't just go off of
out.
ferritin. In fact, I'm kind of a ferritin, not ferritin jaded, but I feel like I'm not cliche ferritin person. I don't know if that's the way to talk about it, guys, but I think we get too simplistic with ferritin sometimes, and it's not what should guide us. I like to look at H&H, iron studies, ferritin, and I'm very comfortable with ferritin being wacky in that context and not meaning what we think it might mean. I know that sounds like a dumb way to say that, but
No, but ferritin is going to be an acute phase reactant as well. So
Right.
it can also raise when the body's inflamed. So we want to think about that totality. I would have done a blood draw with high serum iron and a normal ferritin as well, because you don't want that unbound iron getting sequestered into tissue either. And that's where it's going to end up going.
right.
Where was she in her menstrual cycle with each of those?
Good question. Let me see if I can look back in her note if she said
And do they have any children?
they do. They have 3 kiddos, not 72, which is cool.
That's awesome. Not
Winning,
yet.
right?
Not yet. Well, if none of the boys are named Junior, then they think they're still having more.
Uh-oh, I'll have to find that out next appointment. She did drink abnormal amounts of water before her labs. I don't know if we noted this. This is from my scribe, and so I don't know if she has anything else to add. So good question, Emily. She doesn't have crazy periods, so it could be menstruation, right? But it's not like she has excessive menstruation. And what's interesting is her thyroid just super normalized. Even her DHA, it's like things just got kind of naturally better just with this little addition of copper. And
Is she supplementing with vitamin D? I've never seen that.
She is, and I don't like to push D too high. But because I think how Morley gets about things, I guess that's Morley land too. Anyways, so okay, so my question is, she got more panic symptoms, and my fear was that was related to the copper. And so I kind of wanted to show you guys her pyramid and just see.
Did you remeasure her zinc after she started supplementing with the copper? Like, did she lose too much?
So the cool thing is, and I have no idea why we did this, so I don't know if I put in her lab order or my health coach did. I feel like a giant dork because I didn't check her zinc and copper this time. Like, what the heck? And so I was very frustrated with myself yesterday about that. But we are checking it next time. What I was wondering though is, should I have her pulse it more? Like, is copper something that you guys would pulse? I'm actually very surprised I did that because I'm pretty meticulous with.
When did you draw the blood? When did you send the specimen in? You probably know this already.
Oh yes. Oh, I'm a good call, Naomi. I'm like a master of, hey, can you please call and have a lab report add on these codes really quick, please? Unfortunately, this was through Avexia, and Avexia I can't add on after the fact because they pay out of pocket.
How much copper and in what form?
Let me tell you.
Thank you.
And this is I'm glad you're asking, because this is something I was wondering too. I'd say my copper administration to her was a little haphazard because I'm sure there are more optimal ways of doing this. I gave her copper glycinate by Pure Encapsulations, which is 2 milligrams. And so what I'm wondering is, did it replenish her, but now is that too much to take on a daily basis? Which I don't.
Potentially, but how, not on a copper note, but how was her sodium and potassium on the previous test? Because they were both pretty low. So
Yeah,
maybe we're just thinking copper because it's what you added, but maybe her other electrolytes.
This is something we talked about yesterday too. This is lower than I prefer them to be. This is in September. Okay, so 139 for sodium, 340 for potassium. But check this out. And I was like,
look at the next one.
did you drink a ton of water before your labs? And she's like, oh yeah, I drank like a gallon and a half. And I'm like, girlfriend, no,
Okay.
no gallons, like ever.
Yeah.
So
Because I mean, I would feel a little anxiety if my sodium and potassium were that low.
because your brain would be swelling and awesome things. would be
Yeah.
happening.
So let's just not discount that piece also. And that sodium is going to be a big push for the adrenals. So if they're struggling as a result, that might be part of where her anxiety is kicking up as well.
Can we talk about that for a second, actually? Because I look at sodium potassium on all of my patients, and I prefer them to be at least kind of mid-range. I don't know how you guys feel about that. I don't like to see them in the lower half, but I feel like it's not as simple as just sodium potassium. I mean, I feel like there's a certain amount of complexity to that issue. And I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page with that. When you're discussing this with patients, or just how you're thinking in your Emily brain that we're going to rent, or McKay brain, like, how are you guys, you look at this and then what are you doing with it in your head?
So most minerals have an antagonistic relationship with multiple minerals. It's not that sodium and potassium keep each other in check and never the twain shall meet and they don't interact with any other minerals. There's a relationship between potassium and magnesium. There's the magnesium and calcium. Like there's with copper and iron, there's a relationship, but then with copper and zinc, there's a relationship. So it's not this one-to-one overly simplistic way of thinking. And a lot of times, that's our foundation with nutrition, that like, oh, when you add copper, you're going to push out some zinc and vice versa. So keep that in mind as, we go in this as you start supplementing with them. But this is a pattern of both low sodium and low potassium. It's not that potassium's high and there goes all her sodium or vice versa. So and some of that is because she just flooded her system and washed everything out. So, if sodium is low, it's going to be harder to hold on to everything else as well. So, I mean, is she over consuming water on a regular basis? Is she doing things like saunas or just working up a big sweat on a regular basis and not replenishing those minerals? Is she not, does she have low hydrochloric acid that she's not absorbing some of her other minerals? And her chloride level is pretty low, but her bicarb level is also. So here again, it's not that clear acidosis, alkalosis. She's just kind of on that lower end altogether.
I feel like I want to do a deep dive on all of those markers again. It's been a few years since I have. Any recommendation for that?
I think Michael McAvoy's blood chemistry class is pretty good.
I just bought his one that you mentioned before, the one that includes the organic acids. Maybe I'll go get are you meaning like a foundational one versus the?
He's got a couple. So the one that includes the organic acid might include the look into the functional blood chemistry as well.
Okay. Yeah, I just feel like I need to revisit this I feel like I had a good grasp on it before, but I need to review. I want to be more.
It'd be a good idea to do Soleil water for him, for this person.
For sure. But I don't know what you guys find. I guess this kind of goes a little deeper into this, but like I'll start with Soleil water and then, like I'll use Quinton. But I mean, do you feel like you always see these things resolve when you use those? Or sometimes I think there's something deeper at play when we see some of these imbalances here. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, often there's a cell membrane integrity component and the compartmentalization of fluids and electrolyte minerals. So especially in someone who has a lot of mold exposure, there may be a major phospholipid component that needs to be addressed as well, especially because everything is on that low end.
There's her PEMT. I mean, So
Oh, yeah.
is that where your thinking would go then? Like
Oh, yeah.
sadness, right?
Well,
So
and go up to the nutrient metabolization.
that's actually where I
That-
wanted. How'd you read my mind, Emily? We were talking about biotin yesterday. She asked me questions and I was like, oh, Miriam, yes, this is something I'm going to talk with my friends about tomorrow because where did you want me to go first, Emily? And then I'll go there to the biotin.
Can you just click the circle first?
Sure.
So, yeah, the combination of the PEMT and the PANK is pretty significant for choline. There are a couple other choline-related SNPs in this section, but for the choline kinase beta, but she's okay there. They really play a big role in things like POTS, cell membrane integrity, myelin synthesis, and will really amplify the significance of PEMT. But though that's pretty big PEMT variant right there.
Right. And I'm like, so do you feel like that right there could then impact that sodium calcium situation, right?
Yeah. I mean, PEMT can create basically leaky cells.
Yeah. And so then,
and if you measure if you do bioimpedance testing in your office, you can measure that. And she's going to hate me for this, but if you contact Laura at Tree of Life, she can tell you what type of bioimpedance device we use. But when we see people in the office, we measure that on everyone. It just takes a couple of minutes. It's less than 5 minutes. And it's such great indicators of intracellular and extracellular fluid and that cell membrane integrity. And, we can really see a lot of positive shifts and measure the efficacy of interventions like phosphatidylcholine. We'll see that BIA number progressively increase as we bring that in.
and how is it done?
It's an electrical measurement.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 2 pads that are put on the hand and 2 that are put on the foot. They lay flat it runs for less than 5 minutes, and it's measuring the resistance in order to kind of gauge the electrolyte balance. I don't know all the technicalities
No,
of
it's
it.
all good. This is like a dilemma that I have. We've been 100% telemedicine since COVID. And I'm like, oh, I like the device you were talking about last time and this device. I'm so torn.
Yeah, I mean, I have not been seeing anybody in the office. And just yesterday I saw someone, I was like, well, let me look back on your bioimpedance markers from the last time I saw you. Okay, they were at 5.4, they should be above 6.7. So yeah, you definitely have needed more choline for a long time. It's good guideposts. Like, I love having those things to check in on without saying, okay, I need you to run another organic acid test for several $100.
Right.
And the BIA unit is inexpensive and, quick to run. We have our front office staff run people through it.
Oh, that is so
For how
cool.
long would you supplement and expect some improvements?
I mean, we check people every time they come in. So there are people who, are in every 3 weeks, and we'll see changes in that time. Like, that's one of the reasons that it's so nice to be able to, cross-reference with some of these functional markers without it always having to go off to a lab. So we also do heart rate variance on everyone in-house. And so when you have that combination of HRV measuring the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system dominance and that bioimpedance analysis measuring the cell membrane integrity, you can really get a good gauge for, whether something like PC is really a needed intervention and how long you're going to need to use it, whether or not it's working.
Oh, that would be so helpful.
But people really like being able, like, even if they know nothing about the test, they like having it run.
Mhm.
Oh, you're checking things. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know what
So,
things are, but I know you're looking at numbers.
do you all like the BioBody PC? Is that what everybody's using? It's supposed to be
I was
better
going to
than
ask
others.
that. You know what? I've found I'm taking the Thorn PC right now, and I have taken BioBody Liquid, which I couldn't tolerate, couldn't get it down. The Thorn, I've had some problems with that also. And same thing down the esophagus, just a little difficult.
Does
But
it taste bad?
well, no, I mean, yeah, when it's not in a capsule, it's horrible. But getting those large capsules down, and depending on who they are, they might need to take quite a few of them. But I found the Zymogen ones, somehow I tolerated them better. And I think that partly they often are very slick because I think they ooze from their capsule. So they're just a little bit easier. I don't know.
I wish their monopure was a little bit easier.
I also want to just note, if they do have the pink there, that they might want to take some Pantethine with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, with the PC, like at the same time.
Yeah.
Pantethine with PC. Okay, and then so let me get down here. So in her biotin section, I mean, I know it looks like -1, but she's homozygous up here. How should we be looking at
And
this?
that's not just biotin, that's biotin, pantethine, and lipoic acid. So remember, all of those solute carriers are the transport into the cell. So you may see high serum levels and low intracellular levels. So the pantethine and the biotin you can cross-reference with something like an organic acid test to see what's actually making it into the cells. The lipoate, you could look at the carbohydrate metabolites, the lactate and the pyruvate, because lipoic acid is going to be one of their cofactors.
Mm-hmm. Let me go there. Go ahead.
And generally, you might just need more. And anytime it's a solute carrier issue, I like to be really straightforward with people and tell them, like, basically, we're going to have to give you a lot more of this than the average person because you're not going to use most of it. So yes, you're going to lose about 80% of what you're putting in your mouth. We don't have any other way around that right now. We've got to keep dripping it in at a higher rate so that enough of it gets into your system.
Okay, and so we would be considering that for her, for biotin, lipoic acid, and pantethine.
And pantethine with that particular set of steps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And as we learn more about the solute carriers, we may find better ways to go about dealing with them other than flooding the body with them. That's what we do with the carnitine ones in the fat usage section. That's generally the approach that we take with these. So the lactate and pyruvate are both fine. So there's unlikely to be an issue with lipoic acid.
So if they were not fine, like let's say one of them was high, where are you going there then?
So if they are elevated, especially if it's pyruvate elevated, then you could think about like the PHP carb assist or diaxanol from orthomolecular products.
Okay. So then let's get down here. And then, it was her Adipic, sorry, I was incorrect.
But
she was
her
taking a
B5
bunch of supplements when she came to me, so. Okay.
So she's peeing out some of it. So symptomatically, is she using it? She has 3 kids, so she's making some hormones.
Right? Her hormones aren't super terrible.
And
so
her biotin is a little bit on the low side.
And her B6.
Her B6 is a lot on the low side.
So, okay, so that
But she had some interesting B6 SNPs.
Yes.
What did we see her riboflavin? Sorry.
Yeah, here, let me get back up there. Okay, right. Oh, sorry. I went too far. That thiamine category.
This section is just humongous.
Emily,
Okay,
can
here we
you tell
go.
us- Emily, can you tell us about what would be considered high doses of biotin and LA and the thiamine for somebody who has those SNPs that needs to?
For the biotin, I would do at least 8,000 per day. That would be a really safe level to do. And I would check responsiveness. I mean, biotin is a pretty clear one because we're going to see in the hair, the skin, and the nails whether we have adequate levels. It's pretty safe to supplement with. You can go up to 8,000 twice a day quite safely if need be. But I tend to be more on the conservative side, so I tend to start between 8 and 10 with most people.
Does that need to be divided doses, or would you just give that dose once a day?
If you're doing 16,000, I would do it as a divided dose, just to maximize your chance of absorbing all of that.
What about 8 though?
8, I would just do 1.
Okay, cool.
And the thiamine, on the thiamine? which you-
Here's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thiamine, I always like to go really slowly and titrate up.
Mhm.
And the form is going to depend on what type of symptoms they have. If there's any type of peripheral neuropathy, then I'm going to use something along the lines of benfotiamine, so it will be active in peripheral tissues. But if there's neurological symptoms, then we want to use either sulbutamine or lipothiamine so that we're able to get that B1 not only into the cell, but across that blood-brain barrier.
Which were the last two, Emily? I'm sorry.
Sulbutamine
Mhm.
and lipothiamine.
Lipothiamine, and that was if they had what?
If there's symptoms of, if there's neurological symptoms, like autistic children with aggregation of oxalates in the brain, often it's low brain levels of B1, unresolved anxiety and low GABA levels. You know, B1 is a really important and often overlooked cofactor in glutamate to GABA conversion. So there we need a form that's going to be active in the brain. And benfotiamine cannot cross the blood-brain barrier, and thiamine does not effectively get across the blood-brain barrier in any meaningful way. But sulbutamine can, using the B1 transporter, so the SLCs for B1, sulbutamine and benfotiamine will both use those just in the brain and peripheral tissue respectively. And then lipothiamine will diffuse across both cell membranes and the blood-brain barrier. So that is a good choice if people have a lot of solute carrier issues on B1, because that particular form doesn't use that mechanism.
Totally.
And so, but because we see such a profound relationship between low thiamine and high accumulation of oxalates, and oxalates being displaced by the addition of B1, I would always go real slow with that and titrate up thiamine.
And I know, I appreciate you saying these things over and over again to us, because I know we've talked about this before. And when we talk about thiamine, I always think about your experience when you started taking one of them, and it was quite extreme. So,
well, it was actually doubling them up. So part of that issue that I created for myself was that I had been taking benfotiamine one day and sulbutamine on alternate days for months and doing fine. And I took them both together one day, and it was just too much.
Too much. Okay.
And
Here's her
benfo,
B6 markers that Naomi was asking about.
you said neuro problems do the lipo and the salbutamol.
Either or, I wouldn't do them both together.
But for benfo, what do you use in the benfo?
Peripheral tissue, like musculoskeletal pain, exercise intolerance, people who get just so achy after exercise, like for days and days after that, who aren't clearing that lactic acid out. But benfotiamine for almost any type of neuropathy, any type of peripheral neuropathy, even diabetic neuropathy, really excellent intervention there. So that achiness, the benfotiamine really helps moving that lactic acid out.
Okay. I was just looking here in terms of her panic.
So with that DHFR, GPR, She's got all the oxytocin,
Yeah.
you know, with that oxytocin presentation, what's
Here,
going on with her,
I think I may have got a little frozen.
Yes, you did.
Sorry, I'm back. I don't know if it was me or Emily, but I'm back. Sorry, I had to go to a different area of my house. Can you guys hear me now?
I can hear you. Yep.
Are we back?
Yep, you're back.
Can you see me now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Sorry about
so,
what thing, Emily, about the DHA?
so actually let's think about the DBH. So that's going to inhibit the dopamine to epinephrine and norepinephrine. So she's likely, we can cross-reference because you have the ode, she's likely to be low in epinephrine and norepinephrine. So her stress response gets shifted to the adrenals because she's not going to have diverse mechanisms for physiologically coping with that stress. It's going to be that cortisol response. And if she's not making adequate cortisol because she's not breaking down her fats because she doesn't have enough bile because of the PEMT, and then she's not turning them in to hormones because of the PANK, she may burn through that cortisol pretty quickly, and then she's peeing out all of her sodium. So the adrenal component would certainly be a big thing to look at. But then with this oxytocin presentation,
Let's
she's
talk
going to
about
be,
that.
so this is an overexpression. It's a gain of function mutation. We overexpress that bonding hormone, and women in particular are going to be much more vulnerable to the emotions and stresses of other people. These are generally highly empathetic people, and that is pushed into Amish women even more. Your life as an Amish woman is to be a caregiver for everyone else, never for yourself.
Can we see this? And it's with the codes exactly. Is this something that was added recently?
No.
No, because
this is my favorite snip to talk about. Well, there's always been the big oxytocin section, and then there's the one empathy snip that's popped out.
Do you want me to go up to this one, or you wanted me to go down?
No, so all this has been here. It's the single one that she's homozygous
the single
on.
one at the bottom is
this one.
That's the one.
Okay.
This, out of every single snip in here, this is the only one that both Bob and myself will guess about, and we discovered this independently. So,
but is this
like
the
we were,
one where you say you wouldn't want to hire somebody who has these snips? Is this the one?
Oh, I would 100% hire someone who has these snips.
Opposite. Okay, that's why.
If they were like,
if they have healthy boundaries, but I mean, this is someone who you would have to carefully structure your office around this person, because they're gonna, if you have a high stress person, they're gonna soak up that stress.
Yeah.
But if they didn't have any variant here, that's the one that you guys are concerned about, right?
Well, I would totally hire them for AR. I would hire them for dealing with my high stress clients, because it's going to be harder to get to them.
Right. If they were,
these are people who, they're not going to internalize other people's emotional struggles. So like I have a 1 here. I could not do my job if I had a 2. Like Bob was like, I really would have thought that you have a 2. I was like, do you know the people I talk to? I would be curled up in a weepy ball under my desk all day. These people with this presentation, like this is the snip that makes women cry when you talk about it, because if you tell people, you are likely, when your partner is stressed, you're feeling it like it's your stress. These are people who women get into emotionally abusive relationships. They get gaslit by people because they see the good in everybody. They're finding that good, and they're bonding much more deeply. And that can be a good thing, but it can be a really dangerous thing as well. So we have to, I always tell young women, this is the healthy boundary snip. You have to build them because they may not be hardwired into you. and it can be an asset or a vulnerability depending on what we do with it. So we have to learn how much more a learning thing with this presentation to have those healthy emotional boundaries. She may be carrying the weight of a lot of other people. Often people with this presentation will be the person that everyone else turns to drop their emotional baggage onto. You'll find a lot of people who are kind of emotional vampires will seek out people with this presentation, and they don't realize that this person is then carrying all that extra weight. So I always try to talk to my clients about this, especially women, with having those healthy boundaries, but also checking in with themselves when they're feeling more stressed to see whose stress is it that they're carrying. Is it their own, or are they worrying about everyone that they've come into contact with for the past week? And I do like to remind people that, sometimes other people may emotionally unburden themselves onto us and put that weight on our shoulders, but they don't always care whether or not we continue carrying it. Sometimes all they wanted was to set it down. They didn't necessarily want us to pick it up and make it our own weight. And with this presentation, a lot of that anxiety may be the weight of other people that she's carrying.
That's a good way to describe it.
So, little tip, this is the function of Chinese medicine that's called this sympathy part, this empathy, rather, the heart protector. It literally does that. And there's a point called inner frontier gate that's about 3 fingers down. So any type of protective essential oils, or even just rubbing that a little bit, can help them keep the boundaries there.
What's it called again?
That point is called inner frontier gate.
Pericardium
6.
Do you think that wearing something like C-bands over that point, like the motion sickness bands,
it would be stimulating it? Yeah, it's possible. That would be an interesting thing. I never thought about that, never made that leap, but yeah, it should.
So somebody who doesn't have any SNPs here, this is the one that you wouldn't hire, right?
No.
I would hire them for very specific things. I would hire them for AR. I would hire them for dealing with my emotionally draining people.
Yeah.
I would.
What do you mean AR?
Like accounts receivable.
Oh yeah.
People who aren't paying.
Right.
But I would not hire someone with no SNPs to work side by side with someone with homozygous presentation, because you would get into like a codependent or an emotional bullying type of dynamic. I mean, it would be a place you would want to tread cautiously. But Bob and I were sitting in an airport talking about SNPs because we're big nerds, and we just stumbled across the fact that, like, he likes to play a game with talking to people and not looking at this, and then he likes to guess what their presentation is. And I just naturally, like, within the course of the first 10 minutes, I always am like, oh, I bet I know what your oxytocin is. It is that telling. And most of the time with women in particular, they'll start to cry. They have always known this about themselves. They've known they're more sensitive. They know they're picking up on stuff. Nobody ever believes them that they're this sensitive. Their partners are often critical, or they've come across people who don't understand why everything makes them cry, or why they have this hair trigger, and they're relieved and shocked to know that you could tell this about their genes. And for men
right now, I have this. This is triggering me right now because I'm an empath, and it's really hard for me to work with people, but I have no variations here. I am very empathetic, but maybe not in the way that's helpful.
No, empathy can be a learned skill as well. This is not the only thing that defines it. And so my whole life is an interesting case study in this. My mom has no SNPs and my daughter has 2 SNPs. So throw them into a room together and see how they play.
I want to pause here. It's 4:00. So just if somebody has to jump off, that's fine. And if we can go a little bit longer, maybe Terry, we could finish yours if you can stay, or if Emily, you have to run, then that's fine too. So I just want to put a time marker down. We've hit our 2 hours.
Emily, do you mind saying what you're going to say about dudes with this?
Yeah, so I think they're dealing with a whole different set of issues because we don't live in a society that really embraces sensitivity in men. And so these are often young men who are bullied or who maybe they become bullies as a defense mechanism. But again, it can be used as an asset rather than a vulnerability. And sometimes communication is the biggest key there, like to be able to say to a young man, this is a really awesome thing, despite what society may tell you. You know, having someone empower them and know that it's not this bad thing, that they are more sensitive, that they have deeper feelings, that they form these stronger emotional connections.
Go ahead, Emily. But I want to add something on at the end of that.
One of my most professionally successful clients, who is like a vice president for Microsoft, he does like strategic acquisitions. He has a homozygous variant. And when we talked about it, he was like, oh, this is how I make my bread and butter. When I walk into a room, I can read the room like nobody else. He has learned how to use this increased sensitivity to his advantage rather than it being an emotional liability. So sharing anecdotes like that can be really empowering because there's not a lot nutritionally that we can do to support this. So this is where just education and communicating and giving people tools and resources can be really helpful. And if you have someone who is emotionally closed off, who has no variance here, not someone like Naomi who is highly empathetic despite the SNP presentation, someone like my mother who is not empathetic and has this presentation, she does tremendously well with the oxytocin nasal sprays. She's like a whole different person then. But
you're fun to be around now. Yeah.
She feels emotionally different and better with it. But the thing and she feels less inflamed with it as well because oxytocin can be a NOx inhibitor. So there are reasons outside of being able to live with someone that you would want to think about using the oxytocin nasal sprays, but the more you use them, the less effective they are. So it's the type of thing to just pulse in periodically, not to use every day.
I guess I'm trying to understand with the comment on the side of this particular gene, does that actually mean that we want it to be 0 and they will be more, have more of that decreased level of social?
So what the studies point to here, the normal human condition is to not have any variance. And a lot of the studies that they have done on the SNP look at charitable giving and what percentage of your income you might donate in a certain charitable situation. I think that the reason we see that decreased level of socialization, when you talk to people with this presentation, they often get overwhelmed by social situations. If you're soaking up the energy of everybody else around you and you're around a lot of people, that's a lot of competing energies coming at you all at once. And so we'll find people withdrawing because they get overwhelmed in big groups. You know, oxytocin is our bonding hormone. It makes us feel close to people, but there's a threshold for that. And so people may get tipped over the edge. However, in a very positive and supportive group, it can be hugely beneficial.
Interesting, because I talked to a gentleman about this recently and how it affected him at work. And he was just saying, like, when there's stressors on the outside, he does really well with people, but he feels like he internalizes a lot of the stressors. And that was just he's kind of pretty high up at a big car dealership. And so it's kind of interesting hearing his perception versus like the patient we're talking about, of how.
So the point I want to bring up, and I forget, what's the part of the brain that connects the hemispheres, the connecting part? Anybody remember? Yes.
Something.
Corpus
So-
callosum.
Corpus callosum, yeah.
There we go. Thank you. So that in men, that is not nearly as developed as in women. So you got the emotional side and the verbal side split. And so what can happen with this empathy is there's a ton of feelings there, but it doesn't quickly travel over to the verbal side of things, especially with young boys who their brains really aren't developed at all. So they can be literally incapable of expressing what they're feeling. They know they're feeling something really strong, but they
Wow.
can't talk about it until maybe the next day. And they've had time to kind of process through. So that's really important to think about, because they're not, their brain structure isn't that of little girls where they can kind of real time give you what's going on there. It's just not going to happen. They're not being stubborn. They literally, some of them literally just don't know. I think that's really important.
And I have to wonder if along that lines, if some of like the Qigong exercises that work on strengthening the connection between the two hemispheres might be beneficial in those cases, things like just switching your fingers, like little things like that.
Yep. The incy spider thing.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, no, I had an educator once who swore that a lot of the problems she was seeing was that children weren't allowed to crawl and develop, especially boys, and that their opposite sides going, and the silly nursery rhymes, and that just that function just wasn't as thoroughly developed as it should be. And she was dealing in a community college teaching child development, and she saw it in the young adults that she was dealing with. At least
That's fascinating.
That was her take. Yeah.
I feel like that's so relevant, McKay. Like, that's why we process quickly. And then my husband, it's like, oh, look, you're just processing what I processed like hours ago or yesterday. It's exactly why. And it is very consistent.
Yes. Yep. There's a fabulous book called The Wonder of Boys, and the author did a follow-up, The Wonder of Girls, and really it's all about raising boys, and it's based on brain physiology pretty much, and it's super helpful, especially for young moms who don't have brothers.
Oh yeah.
If they have brothers, they get it, it's no problem. But if they never had brothers, particularly younger brothers, boys can be super confusing, that they're just not familiar with. It's like, how come you're non-functional? It's like, well, because he's a boy. Just give him some time. He functions in different ways. Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so
I just want to say one last thing, because this is an Amish woman, and I feel like I have additional insight into how Amish women are raised.
Yes.
The way that this community views women in that subservient capacity as being like, you serve your husband, that it's going to be out of her comfort zone to think about taking care of herself.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that being said, I see a lot of Amish clients, they often know they need to take care of themselves, but they're going to find every justification to take care of everybody else first. And that's going to be amplified with this. So, I mean, think about copper and zinc, think about the adrenals, think about the sodium, but talk to her about everybody else's stresses and how she's coping with them.
I think a benefit I have with her is that she's already seen so many people before me. And so I think she's advanced, if you will, in her culture in terms of thinking like that. It's pretty amazing. I mean, and her husband is very supportive. So I feel very lucky in that sense that although culturally we have the situation, that's kind of, I think then changing some of their views on things is creating that huge stressor in their families, which could play to this SNP. But thankfully, it works well in terms of us wanting to work on health things, right? So, but I think you make a good point that I can't assume there, and I always need to make sure I come back to that to make sure I'm not missing something there with it. But in terms of these SNPs, you're thinking that DBH and the empathy is...
I think the DBH is going to put additional stress on the adrenals.
Okay.
And I think the adrenals and the cortisol production may not be quite robust as it should be because of the PANC and the PEMT. And then I think because of the oxytocin SNPs, a little bit of stress is going to feel like a lot of stress. And that's going to be even worse for the adrenals because of the DBH and the PEMT and the PANC.
Okay.
So I think it could easily slip into that negative feedback loop with.
So then would you be focusing on supporting that DBH, supporting the PANC and PEMT?
And things like the Soleil water.
For starters, just not gallons.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, definitely not.
So then using that from a sodium perspective, and then do you think it would be reasonable to, like if we're talking PEMT PANC, give her some PC? Like,
yeah, like she might need, I mean, does she have any energy? Is she just running on like
fatigue is
dopamine
like
alone?
Fatigue is her big thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's that ACAT and PANC and PEMT SNP. Is she getting carb cravings, like sugar cravings? That's the only thing that's fueling her right now.
Because she's not being able to be fueled in any way with fats.
Yeah, and ACAT is going to play a role with protein utilization. We need acetyl-CoA transferase for proteins to be to enter into the Krebs cycle as well. So when we see that significant ASNAP, carbohydrates are the thing that most easily get into the Krebs cycle. So we'll often see really significant carbohydrate cravings. So you can give things like calcium pyruvate, and by supplying that pyruvate directly, you don't have to eat as many carbs. You just get that end point. But then giving additional acetyl L-carnitine, there again, you have that acetyl donor, using things like pantethine. So the old PHP ACAT assist is actually really well formulated for this type of presentation, but then you would probably want to add additional phosphatidylcholine on top of it.
And okay, so phosphatidylcholine, ACAT assist, PANC.
And there's pantethine in the ACAT assist.
Okay, cool. So then that covers that base.
Right.
And then
But if you have rice issue, there's rice in it.
I will look back. She kept a food log. We fax a lot, like because we don't hear electronically. So
That's
I know there's
awesome.
fax food log that's carb heavy. I'll have to look back and see about rice.
Well, and that ABCB11 variant that she has, that's going to be a bile salt export pump SNP. So, and she's been living in mold. So as you add that PC, she might start mobilizing some sequestered toxins. So be aware of that and think about maybe onboarding a binder before you do the PC or around the same time.
And would you give her bile, like would you use TUDCA or something like this for?
I would start with the PC because we really want, when we have these ABCCE or ABCB SNPs, any of those multi-drug resistant protein or bile salt export pumps, we want to get the body to make and move bile on its own rather than taking it. Because when we take something like TUDCA, it helps from the digestive end, but not the detox end. So good for breaking down the fats, not for pumping those conjugated toxins out of the hepatic cells. So I might add something like bitters or AF beta food, some type of cholagogue to squeeze the bile ducts and get it where it's needed. That's often a good choice with those ABC variants, artichoke, dandelion,
And then
any of those would be
you
helpful.
said, just to make sure I got it clearly, TUDCA helps with the digestive part, not the what part?
Not the detox part.
Yeah.
So when you just give various forms of bile, it's different than pumping toxins out along with the bile that we've made.
So if you had somebody without a gallbladder and you wanted to give them something like TUDCA, we would just also need, well,
You
I
could,
guess
well, they're not mutually exclusive. So I'll often have people doing
But-
all of the above because we want them, in the short term, they might have to take it while we're trying to get them to make it. And then
Right.
in theory, we would shift away from the complete form and more towards the precursors as the body comes back into health and those body stores are kind of replenished. With somebody without a gallbladder, you might need to do long term, you might need to give it to them. And remember, they do still have those bile ducts, they're just rerouted. So you might
Right.
still need some type of cholagogue to help with delivery because we still need to get those toxins all the way out of the body.
Right. So what would be your, let's say, optimal situation? We've worked through this. Where would you typically see someone without a gallbladder ending up? Like on something like TUDCA, on something like PC, just bitters? Like, what are you thinking?
If I have somebody without a gallbladder, then I have them keep something like TUDCA or bile acid factors on hand always. And if
Okay.
they're eating a fattier meal, I want them to take it. But
Okay.
I'd like to see them do, no, I mean, if they don't have any PEMT variants,
Mhm.
if they don't have any of the choline kinase SNPs in the nutrient section, if they are okay with, what is it, the CYP7A4 for bile acid synthesis, if they're okay and they don't have a gallbladder for some other reason, you know, maybe they were in a car accident and they lost their gallbladder because of that, then they might only need that digestive end of support.
Like
But if
bitters
they're-
or TUDCA?
Probably TUDCA in most cases. Bitters might be enough for the average meal, but something like TUDCA for a fat heavy meal.
And so you
But
would just
then
use a
if
PRN.
there, yeah, and then if there is a high toxic load as well, then you've got to do something to get them moving that bile out and getting those toxins from the hepatic cells out into those excretion pathways.
And for
So-
that, you would be focused on,
Like the PC, the cholagogues,
I know I'm
As
beating a
well-
dead horse.
as well as NRF2 support, because so we talk about NRF2 as being important as a signaling molecule for things like antioxidant expression, but it's also really critical for the expression of MRP2, MRP3, these active ion transport pumps to get the conjugated toxins out.
Okay.
Right. It's 20 after. And Emily, how are you on time?
I have a meal train responsibility, so I have to actually go cook dinner for a friend of mine going through chemo. So I have to
Exactly.
say my goodbyes.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for talking through that case. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, have a great day, everybody.
You too.
I'd like to
Um,
give a quick update on that lady with the lichen sclerosis.
Yeah.
Sure.
I started her on aloe and we opened up a capsule of the vitamin A, the actually retinol, opened it up, put it in the aloe and have her apply it. She is 75% better.
No
Yay.
kidding.
And then she's also starting this. Now, she started getting better before this, but she said, oh, somebody else is sharing.
Oh, let me stop sharing. And Terry, you said you used retinol vitamin A in the
The
aloe?
pure encapsulation retinol, not beta carotene.
Yeah.
And she started putting this on,
Oh yeah.
and this is even helping better. So it's another layer in there.
Okay.
It's
But
got
she-
one of everything.
Yeah, she just said that she has had such a huge change with the fresh she had a plant of aloe and she's been taking it from there and adding the studies I was seeing saying that the vitamin A was very important. There is some vitamin A in here, but before she got this, I said, okay, you already, she was taking the A orally. And so I said, why don't you just pinch it, get some, put it in that aloe, apply it. And she said it was very good.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would almost bet that the A there is beta carotene and not retinol
yeah.
because
And
of the money.
she did say that this was more soothing,
Hmm.
but there was a lot more healing with that A and aloe.
Son of a gun. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. So cool.
I was excited to hear.
Mhm.
Thank you all.
Hi, Naomi.
All righty, see y'all.
Thank
Yeah.
All right, Terry.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. See you in a couple weeks, right?
2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.